As we start brewing going into this Everfest Classic Constructed season, I wanted to review some of the new cards and break down how they'd work in specific strategies within Rhinar. First, we would start with the equipment, Skull Crushers. With Rolling Thunder being the only forgiving roll enabler currently, this card isn't quite good enough for Classic Constructed. The one exception to this I can think of is if Katsu was a dominant force in the metagame, and then there's a case to run it instead of something like Iron Wrath Gauntlet. For Swing Big, early game it's not really at its best because it's just going to draw armor blocks and not be able to connect. But later on in the game, when your opponent no longer has access to those 4 to 6 points of armor, and you can start adding on damage to this card with things like Awakening Bellow, Primeval Bellow, and even Pummel, you can take the damage to the point where it's outside of your opponent's blockable range and can guarantee that it'll hit. I'm really looking forward to using this card in unison with something like Command and Conquer, where I can draw out the armor blocks early with the Command and Conquers, and then come in these later with those damage increasing effects. For Rolling Thunder, it's going to average 3.5 damage. This is something I'm going to continually remind myself of every time I roll a 1 with this card. The thing is, the card's fine. The rate is 1 resource for 3.5 damage. It gets applied to a weapon. So really it comes down to your playstyle and how much variance you can accept in your games. For High Roller, I really like the blue version of this card as another zero cost Intimidate enabler. I don't think it's better than Awakening Bellow or Primeval Bellow, but rather just different. It gives us another option in these blues that are kind of used as utility cards, because with Brute, I feel like you really only have 7 blues that you kind of have to run, and the remaining spots you have in your deck, you can really tailor towards the plan or metagame you're trying to beat. And this card enables that. So I'm a big fan of this another option. For the red and yellow versions, I just don't believe that they're competitive because there's just too much variance involved with them. For Bare Fangs, the red version of this card is going to be absolutely great for decks that are looking to win on the first cycle of their deck. So in these claw builds, it's really going to shine because those builds don't have a lot of ways of doing respectable damage off of a 2-card hand, and this just gives you a solid chance of coming in for 8 damage off of a 2-card hand in a deck that really wants to play with 3 or more cards every single turn. So it's great that that play style got this new option. For Wild Ride, against opponents who don't plan on blocking, Pulping will be a stronger option, but against opponents who are trying to block or play defense reactions from Arsenal, Wild Ride is going to be a better option there. So it's really nice for these really aggressive Brute decks that run claws and just run a bunch of attack actions that don't really block, that you have a new option to kind of punish these decks that are trying to block and stop that strategy. So while I'm not a fan of this card in that play style, I do think if you're playing that style of a Rhinar deck, that this is a great option for you and should definitely be included at least in your sideboard to punish those style decks who are trying to block you out. For Bad Beats, if more dice rolling payoff cards get printed, this could be playable, but currently I don't believe it is. With Bingo, if you have a blue pitch card in hand, you can threaten up to 9 points of damage with Romping Club if they don't have a non-attack action in hand. Also, one thing that's kind of odd and interesting about Bingo, with Rhinar specifically, is with Rhinar, your opponents really want to be getting defense reactions into their arsenal, and this card kind of punishes them for having them in their arsenal and not in hand against you. So it kind of creates this interesting dynamic, right, where you can punish your opponent for kind of playing correctly against you. The thing is that the card's really reliant on your opponent having a high number of non-instants, non-attack reactions in their deck to really pay off for. So this card's really kind of going to be dependent on the meta game. This isn't something I'd want to run day one in a new meta, but as the meta settles down and you can really take inventory on how many instants and attack reactions you can expect to see against you, this card could see play and be quite strong. I wanted to mention this round's on me, because in Rhinar, I feel like you only have 7 blues that are really mandatory to run. Those being 3 Wrecker Romps, 3 Barraging Beatdowns, and then 1 Reckless Swing. And the rest of your blues you kind of get to fill out with what you want to use to hedge against the meta you're expecting. And this card does give us access to a new tool in our blues to kind of help shut down these ultra wide decks like Katsu if they ever become super prevalent in the meta. The last card I want to talk about is even bigger than that, and I want to begin by breaking down the fail rate of this card based on its color. So in a 60 card deck with 30 legal targets, the red version is going to fail 6.25% of the time, the yellow version is going to fail 12.5% of the time, and then the blue version is going to fail 25% of the time. While I don't think we'll be able to take advantage of that quicken token the same turn we play this card, this does set up some really strong follow-up turns with Rhinar if you are playing in a meta game where the chances of you being able to play with a 5-card hand and really take advantage of that quicken token is possible. I think this card could become a staple in Rhinar if that metagame gets to that point. My personal deck list that I'm using for testing will be in the description below, so feel free to ask any questions you have about that deck list, or anything mentioned in this video in the comments section below. And to all those who have already subscribed, thank you so much, and I'm looking forward to continue to grow this channel and this community together.